Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and tonight's video is what I consider to be one of the most important videos that I have made on this channel up until this point. I'm going to be making some claims that, in my opinion, are quite incredible, even compared to some of the other claims that I've made on this channel. And I've spoken here about angels and demons and all sorts of things. The reason why tonight's video is on such an incredible topic is because I'm not talking about one of the many attainments that I've had during my 18 years sincerely following the esoteric path. I'm not talking about any subjective state of consciousness that I was able to achieve, or anything at all that could be described as a spiritual experience that could be put down to, say, deep psychology, or a mere change in my perception of reality. No, what I'm talking about tonight is a real phenomenon that I was able to witness, and it involves an encounter that I had with beings of light. Actually, multiple encounters. I've hesitated to make this video for a long time, although I knew it was a potential topic that I could cover. Because it just sounds so incredulous. But I've decided that it's time for me to talk about it. A few things have changed since I began this channel. For one thing, disclosure of UFO and UAP phenomena has greatly increased. The video footage of the Tic Tac craft that was captured has been released for a long time now, and it's something that the US military has just acknowledged, that there's these objects floating around that we don't know where they come from, and they seem to defy the laws of physics. And, you know, other people have come out and shared some pretty incredible information. Tucker Carlson, of all people, talking about the reality of the UFO phenomenon, and importantly, for the purposes of this video perhaps, the fact that the way we think about the UFOs is not necessarily correct, that there may indeed be a spiritual explanation, and the beings that are behind them may be spiritual in nature, the kinds of beings contemplated by the religions of the world for centuries beforehand. And so, for me to say that I have experienced an encounter with beings of light, and that it is something that resembled an encounter with a UFO or a UAP, is not unusual in today's day and age. I'm not revealing anything that is not already well and truly out there in the open. Nothing new that people can't find out already if they want to. And so, you know, it had crossed my mind that, you know, if I reveal some of this information, I might get a knock on the door by somebody in a black suit with dark sunglasses. But that kind of concern is no longer there for me, given that I'm really not revealing anything groundbreaking at this point. And it is for that reason I have decided it is time for me to talk about the reality of the light beings. And I'm going to try and keep as much to the facts as I can with this video. I had some encounters. I don't know exactly what I saw, just that I saw it. And I don't want to stray too much from that. I don't want to speculate too much. But I will kind of talk about what I think might be behind it. But I'll be clear to distinguish between that and what I think might be happening, and the facts that I can establish, which may or may not be pointing to that. So the very first thing I need to do before I get to talking about the experiences themselves is some all-important background. So when I was a kid, I was very sensitive to things of a paranormal nature, you might say. I didn't so much see things or hear things or anything, but I would have very significant dreams, which sometimes felt like something very real was trying to communicate with me through the dreams. And from the age of about 11 through to, I don't know, probably the age of 14, I would have recurring dreams about being visited by aliens. And there were some themes that sort of ran throughout the dreams. I would often be taken up into a craft. I would be selected from a crowd of people and then taken away and given an information download into my head. And sometimes I would be given an overt message that I need to pass on a message to the rest of humanity at some point in my life that will be important for their spiritual development. And so these dreams happened quite often. And then later down the track, I stopped having them. At the time I was having them, I was very interested in aliens as a topic, and I kind of lost interest in the topic of aliens. I just assumed that the dreams were perhaps an overactive imagination, perhaps reflective of the fact that I was interested in that topic and that's why I was having the dreams. And in any case, later in my teens, I was much more interested in spirituality. So that's sort of what happened to that interest. I kind of forgot about the dreams, or at least I put them out of my mind to focus on other things. And I didn't think too much about the topic of UFOs or aliens for quite a while, up until I was 23 years old. And at that particular time in my life, I had just graduated from my undergraduate degree, which was journalism and broadcasting. So I was trying to become a TV journalist. And the only way to really break in to that area was to do unpaid work and get experience that way and then apply for a job. So I had become a community journalist for my local community television station. And I was a reporter. Each week I would prepare a report and it would be broadcast to a very small audience that followed the channel. In retrospect, good practice for setting up a YouTube channel, but at the time I wasn't sure if it was really leading anywhere. But anyway, I was doing these weekly broadcasts, preparing these weekly stories. One of the stories was a story on UFOs that had been seen, around the city, around the suburbs. And at the time I thought, well, this isn't the sort of thing I want to cover. I want to be seen in the future as like a serious journalist who covers important social issues and sheds light on those and speaks truth to power. I don't want to be covering something which is going to give me a bad reputation like this, which may or may not be true. So I was kind of reluctant to do the story, but I did it anyway. And one of the people that my editor asked me to contact was a man who claimed to have photographed hundreds of UFOs. He had his own website where he put his pictures up, where he took photos of the sky using a particular technique with his camera. Anyway, I had to interview this guy. So he lived up in the hills. One day I drove up into the hills to meet him and conduct the interview, which I did. But the more interesting things that he said to me were what he said off camera once the interview had finished. And what this man told me as we were standing on his front porch looking over at the trees was that there was actually a technique for contacting the UFOs yourself. People usually think of an encounter with UFOs as, someone just walking along, minding their own business, and then they see something. And there are typically considered to be 4 degrees of contact. Close encounters of the first, second, third, and fourth kind. And what this man was now telling me about was that you could have a close encounter of the 5th kind, which is human-initiated contact, CE5, as it is also known. And this man told me about a technique for doing a CE5 meditation, which was basically like, using Google Earth, but it's a visualization where you go up into space and then you put the intention out that you want to meet a being from another world, and then you zoom back into your location, you vector in, and then these things are supposed to appear. They're supposed to answer the telepathic message that you send out into the cosmos by coming to meet with you. And so I thought at the time, this is a very interesting proposition, but I didn't do anything with that information at the time. For one thing, it was sort of closer to the winter months, so there were overcast skies every day. There was no point in me, as far as I could see, trying to sit under the night sky and see what I could see. But I also wasn't sure. I was still dubious about whether this was actually a thing that was real. But in the meantime, this guy recommended that I watch a documentary, Sirius, which I did. If you're not familiar with Sirius, it's one of the documentaries that has been put together by Dr. Stephen Greer, who's done some very interesting work on disclosure and UFOs and all of that sort of thing. And he specializes in teaching people about this human-initiated contact, the CE5 protocols. Some of the stuff that features in the Sirius documentary is stuff that I'm a bit skeptical about, like the alien mummy, I think is just a bridge too far for me. But the stuff about the CE5 protocols and roughly how they might be put into practice was quite interesting. So eventually a time came in my life where I felt ready to try the CE5 meditation. It was warmer, it was a new year, it was January, much clearer sky, and I had a lot more time on my hands. So I decided to give it a try. It is worth me mentioning as well that at this point in my life, I had just finished the Samek working to attain knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian angel. So, now that that work was finished, which took up a lot of my time, I was free to explore other things. Okay, so to start with, my first attempt at the CE5 protocols. I went out into the back garden. I had the house to myself that night. I sat down in a chair, a simple plastic chair, under the night sky, and I did the CE5 protocols. I did the full meditation, put my intention out that I wanted to meet someone from the cosmos, and then went back into my body. And then I waited. I gazed up at the night sky for about 30 minutes, waiting to see something. And I didn't really know what to expect. I wasn't expecting much of anything, to be honest, but I was open to whatever might want to make contact. And then, to my amazement, off in the distant night sky, off among the distant stars, I saw something. It was like a flash of light, very quick, like that, off in the distance. And then it happened again. And then it happened again. And it was like a quick flash, like somebody signaling with a torch, but up in the sky, in the middle of the darkness of space. And it was kind of an irregular kind of a signaling. It wasn't like every 3 seconds or whatever. It was, just like somebody signaling with a light. It kind of proceeded in that irregular fashion. It wasn't an iridium flare, because I know what those look like. It wasn't any sort of aeroplane or helicopter, because I know what that looks like when their lights flash on and off. This was a much softer light, a much more ethereal looking light. And what's more, it was the exact same phenomenon that had been recorded by others who had done the CE5 meditation and then filmed what they see in the sky. It's known, I now know, as a flashbulb craft. That is the way that it is described by other people doing the CE5 meditations. And this is precisely what I saw. It was the exact same phenomenon. So I was corroborated by other people who had done the same exercise and seen the same phenomenon. So I was over the moon about this. I had made contact, it seemed, with something from the heavens. And I felt a great sense of gratitude and warmth and joy washing over me. And there is something else significant about this experience. So, at the beginning of this video, I spoke about the dreams that I had with aliens. Well, the first alien dream that I had was when I was 11 years old, and in the dream, a craft came down and landed in that same backyard in the family home. And the date that I had the dream was the 26th of January, and it would have happened around midnight. When I saw this craft in the same backyard that I'd had the dream, it was the 26th of January, and it was about midnight. So it was 12 years to the day that I'd had the dream, and it was in the exact location that I'd had the dream. So to me, and this is my inference that I drew based on that coincidence, to me that was a sign that whatever was responsible for the dreams was indeed an external presence, and there was some truth to the process that I was going through in those dreams, and that these beings were really out there and they'd been watching me, and now they were acknowledging to me that they were real and saying hello for the first time in the physical. Now, I feel it's worth me mentioning at this point that the way that the light beings appeared was very different to the appearance of the space aliens that I saw in my earlier alien dreams. I think if this was truly the same beings communicating through different channels, that the appearance of the aliens in the dreams was an embellishment. It was my unconscious trying to create an image to convey what these things were, using the language that I was familiar with, and using the symbols that I was familiar with to try to convey some kind of otherworldly presence. I think it is quite possible, particularly in the case of contacts within dreams, that these things will assume a form that we are comfortable with, that we don't have trouble comprehending, that our mind and our senses won't simply reject, and seeing them as space aliens, which may not indeed bear their true appearance, is one way that this potentially could happen. But I wanted to see if I could reproduce this effect. Over the subsequent days, I chose a time to do the exercise again. And the day that I chose to do it was very close to where my birthday falls. And anyway, so I did the C5 meditation again in the backyard as before, and then waited to see if anything would show up. And it did. And this phenomenon was even more remarkable than the first. So I was sitting in my backyard, and then sort of on this side, there was a tree, like a large tree. And my attention was caught to looking at that tree. Something caught my attention. And what it was these two orbs of light coming from behind the tree, actually very close to where I was in the sky, very low altitude and very close to me. These two orbs traveling together like this. It was as though there was some invisible frame that they were attached to, because they were, although they were separate from each other, they moved perfectly in sync like that, in that formation. And they flew past me, and they continued to fly off into the distance until they went over the horizon. And I got a good look at them, and they were just balls of light. That's all that they were. These balls of pure light. you know, the rational mind, it thinks about these things in hindsight and it tries to come up with explanations, like clever, rational explanations. I thought maybe it was close to Chinese New Year, maybe some Chinese lanterns had strayed and gone past me. I looked up what Chinese lanterns look like as they travel through the sky, and this did not resemble what I saw at all. What's more, my experience was again corroborated by other people who had done the CE5 exercise and had seen exactly the same phenomenon. Two orbs flying very close together through the sky like that. And what's more, actually quite recently, in the last year or 2 years perhaps, I saw the same phenomenon again, at a greater distance this time, but there was nothing like Chinese New Year that was around that time that could have given some other explanation for why I might be seeing lights in the sky at that time. These were two orbs of light that had appeared before me and given me a spectacular display. And what's more, they seemed to be doing it in order to say happy birthday. Throughout the rest of that year, I did the C5 meditation other times and saw other phenomena, things moving in the sky in like a zigzag formation like that. You know, very unusual ways of moving through the sky, including flashbulb crafts that sort of moved in a zigzag like that. I saw a orb of light streak past my face, very close to me like that, almost like the way that a comet leaves a streak in the sky. An unmistakable physical phenomenon. And another time I briefly saw a flash of light to my left in the garden. It briefly illuminated that part of the garden like a floodlight and then disappeared again. So all of these phenomena followed me initiating contact with some kind of advanced cosmic being that might want to say hello. And it sounds incredible, but this really happened. And those previous phenomena that I mentioned, the kind of comet type of a thing and the flash in the garden, again, this has been captured on video by other people who have performed the CE5 protocols. I didn't have the sort of advanced video equipment that other people who have done the protocols had. I had my phone. Even if I did manage to whip it out in time, I don't know if you've seen the resolution of videos on a phone, but you can't even get a good resolution image of the moon, let alone these orbs of light. So, you know, it's not that unusual that it can be challenging to get video footage of these things. So what are they? Are they aliens? The CE5 protocol and the theme of UFO disclosure surrounding how that came about would certainly suggest that they are aliens. But I don't think it's that straightforward. For one thing, Dr. Stephen Greer would be the first person to say that the way we think about extraterrestrials is not always accurate, that these beings are not always like a physical space alien in a spaceship, but rather they are a more spiritual kind of being, almost like something from another dimension, to use modern scientific language. And that is why they appear as this pure white light that doesn't look like the artificial lights that we project, but has a more kind of ethereal, spectral kind of quality to it. And there are many commentators now saying that it is, you know, that it is a spiritual phenomenon rather than a physical one. Well, it's physical in the sense that they manifest in the physical world. But it's not necessarily like, you know, a little green person who lives on another planet getting into their flying saucer and flying here. It might take on a very different form to that. Alien even to a being that would take on such a form. And something much more resembling what might have been described as an angel in ancient cultures. There will be some people that say, you know, oh, it's demonic, but I've encountered a demonic presence before. And this was not one. It was much more like an angelic presence, which I've also encountered. Not physically, of course, in those cases, but as a kind of, as an energy that is in the room. It was very benevolent and it made me feel as though there was something else out there looking out for us. And, you know, this was at a time in my life when I was feeling very cynical, you know, believing that there's no justice in the world, that, you know, that we're all alone and morality is just decided by whoever has the most power, and it was all hopeless. So knowing that there was something out there looking out for us did a tremendous amount of good in my life, and was one of the things that helped to steer me back onto the right path in terms of my spiritual journey. So, are they angels? Are they aliens? I don't actually really know how to describe them. All that I know is that they appear as beings of light, and they seem to travel around in the skies as though they've come from outer space, but they seem to just be able to freely move anywhere in the cosmos that they desire and materialize and dematerialize at will, and they give off a very reassuring, very positive and loving kind of energy. They can be contacted by sending a telepathic signal, and perhaps they can reciprocate that, perhaps in the form of dreams, as is suggested by some of the coincidences. And perhaps they are there to watch over us, or at least some of us, and to gently guide humanity in a certain direction, which is to its benefit in terms of our spiritual evolution. And later on, as I shared this experience with a small number of people who I thought might get it, or might be open to it, I was surprised to learn that a number of other people had seen and or had encounters with these same light beings, these same beings that appear as dancing orbs of light. There was a guy that I used to stack shelves with back when I worked in night shift who says that he saw a mysterious light, and he made a connection that people who have a kind of spiritual aspect to their life seem to see these things. There was a guy that I met through the OTO who was a fellow magician and a brother who was trying to change the dream, as he would say, and for a time we were trying to change the dream together. We did a lot of spiritual work together at one point, and that was the point at which I was doing the CE5 protocols. So I told him about my experience, and he said that he had seen a light at one point when he was on a road trip across the Nullarbor Plain. He saw it coming out of the sky, and again, an orb of light, changing colours, and it followed over the top of the car that he was in for a time and sort of tracked them like that before sailing off into the distance. And that was a phenomenon that he reported had happened to him. The same brother was friends with a guy called Michael Bowen, an artist based in America. He was part of the Haight-Ashbury scene in the 60s, a mystic in his own right. He is the mastermind, if you will, behind the famous flower power photo. He organised that stunt of giving everybody flowers to present to the National Guard during the anti-Vietnam protests outside the Pentagon, as what remains to be one of the most powerful anti-war statements in history to this day. Anyway, this guy was a mystic. He was tapped into something as well, and he had apparently reported at one time that while he was in his bedroom, at least one of these things, it might have been more, but it was at least one, came into his room and started floating around. Another person I know from the spiritual path saw something similar during an NDE, actually in hospital, where they took the form not so much as an orb, but kind of like a geometric kind of shape that was shifting form, but was also made of pure light. Some famous occultists and mystics have also reported seeing this phenomenon. Grant Morrison had an experience with similar beings although he describes their physical form a bit differently. And you can see him recounting his full experience for Disinformation Co., which used to exist. I don't think it does anymore, but they used to publish a lot of, occult, counterculture type of stuff. It's a great name for a publishing company. Grant Morrison, who's kind of off his head, but that's neither here nor there, talks about how he had experiences with these beings in Kathmandu. And that was ultimately the inspiration for his comic series, or I should say graphic novel series, The Invisibles, which became in turn the inspiration for the Matrix movies. And of course, Robert Anton Wilson also talks extensively about this phenomenon and claims to have contacted these beings himself, although it's hard to know if he's being serious. I've sort of touched on that in my video about the serious contact, which you can find on this channel. But some interesting stuff came out of the RAW material, which kind of corroborated my own experience. For one thing, he seemed to think the number 23 was significant when it came to these beings and their presence, and a sign of their presence. I was 23 years old when I made contact with them. Another thing he says is that when they appear, it's kind of closely related to the experience of knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. And again, this mirrors my own experience. I first made contact with these beings very soon after I had attained knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. So there's all these little synchronicities and coincidences connecting everything together. So I really couldn't say how much this links into the wider UFO phenomenon. If everything that is reported as a UFO or a UAP reflects the same type of being, I'm not sure. But there are some tantalizing possibilities to consider with respect to these light beings and the sort of influence they might be having on our world. Like the reports of military officers around the world that these things have been appearing over nuclear missile facilities and shutting the facilities down so they can't use the nuclear missiles anymore. And other reports throughout history, going back into ancient times, of mysterious lights whose appearance is often associated with key historical events, bearing witness to those events or even intervening in them, events which will go on to contribute to the advancing of human civilization in some fashion. And of course, there's all the encounters with angels to consider in the Bible. Again, not sure if it's the same thing, but there's lots of tantalizing possibilities when you start to think about it. Okay, so light beings exist. They're a thing. They can make contact with us, perhaps even have an influence over the direction of our lives and the collective direction of humanity. What are we to make of all of this? Well, there's a couple of things that I would say. I think, although it is a fascinating thing to discover, and can bring a lot of joy and reassurance in a way, I think that it's something that we shouldn't dwell on too much. And this is kind of another reason why I hesitated to make this video, because my intuition is that if we dwell too much on these beings and their presence among us, it could develop into a cargo cult. And we may begin to worship these things as gods, and that is not the way. That is not something we should be doing. There is only one God. It is the ineffable divine. These things are not going to come and save us. And if we think that they do, or they will, then we will spoil our own opportunity to save ourselves, which is what we need to do at this particular point in our collective evolution. They can give us a gentle nudge, they can inspire us, they can influence us in some way, but we should not expect to have all of the hard work done for us. Much like the secret chiefs, who may also be related to this phenomenon. They work very subtly and very silently. So ironically, paradoxically, if they are here to further our spiritual evolution, the best thing we can do for the most part is to ignore them and focus on our own spiritual development as a species and becoming spiritually enlightened ourselves. But knowing that such things exist has indeed opened up the horizons of what is possible in my mind. Things that I never considered before, communicating telepathically across vast swaths of space and time, beings more advanced than us that may even be guiding us, tangible beings, not just a part of our own brain communicating with another. And of course, it raises the possibility that we, puny humans down here, are part of a story that is much bigger than us, which takes us into an exciting future as we slowly discover the greater reality of the universe in which we live. So that's all I have to say on the light beings. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like down below, subscribe to this channel to support my work, and if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.